I'm Anna, 28 years old, and I found myself in one of the most difficult situations of my life involving my younger sister, Jessica, and my boyfriend, Daniel. With Jessica's wedding just around the corner, I started to notice something troubling. It wasn't anything too obvious at first, but the subtle changes in her behavior around Daniel made my stomach churn. At first, I thought I was overreacting, but as time went on, the signs became impossible to ignore. It all began with little things like how Jessica would laugh a bit too much at Daniel's jokes, even when they weren't all that funny. She'd compliment him constantly, telling him he was so funny in response to things he said, and she seemed to find excuses to touch him. Nothing overt, just a casual hand on his arm here and there, or brushing past him a little too closely. These subtle gestures were starting to leave me uneasy, but I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, it was a time of excitement with the wedding, and maybe she was just being overly friendly. But as the weeks passed, it became more uncomfortable to ignore. I started noticing that Jessica would always find a way to be near Daniel. Whether it was during family dinners or gatherings, she'd position herself beside him, often asking for his help with wedding details, even when I was standing right there. It felt as though she was trying to get closer to him, and I began to feel a sense of dread whenever they were together. One evening, after a family dinner where Jessica had been particularly flirtatious, I decided to talk to Daniel about it. I waited until we were home and alone, and then I brought up my concerns. "Did you notice how Jessica was acting tonight?" I asked. Daniel looked at me with confusion and shook his head. "What do you mean?" he replied. I went on to explain the excessive laughing, the casual touches, the lingering glances. He listened but then shrugged it off. "I think you're overthinking it. She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's harmless." But even as he reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His response felt dismissive, as if he didn't see what was so painfully clear to me. Despite his reassurances, my gut was telling me something wasn't right, and I decided to keep a closer eye on things. Every time we were around Jessica, I found myself watching her every move, noticing how she always seemed to position herself near Daniel. The more I watched, the more uncomfortable I became. The tension between us grew. I started to feel like I was the only one seeing what was happening. I couldn't help but feel betrayed by the way Jessica was behaving and by Daniel's refusal to acknowledge it. I was beginning to question everything, wondering if I was simply overreacting or if my concerns were valid. Then one day something happened that left me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. We were all at my parents' house for a family barbecue. After a while, I went inside to use the bathroom. When I returned, I saw something that made my heart stop. Jessica and Daniel were standing together in a quiet corner of the yard, speaking softly to each other. Jessica was laughing at something Daniel had said, her body close to his. The moment they noticed me, they quickly separated, and Jessica walked away, acting as if nothing had happened. I couldn't help but feel a rush of nausea and anger. I wanted to confront them then and there, but I didn't want to create a scene at the family gathering. Instead, I waited until we got home that night. When we were alone, I tried to ask Daniel about it calmly. "What were you and Jessica talking about earlier?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked surprised by the question. "Oh, we were just talking about some wedding stuff like the music selection," he explained. His answer didn't satisfy me, not at all. Why did the conversation need to be so private, and why did they have to stand so close together? I felt my frustration growing. "I don't buy it," I said, my voice tightening. "You and Jessica have been acting way too friendly lately, and it's making me uncomfortable." Daniel sighed, clearly frustrated with me. "What do you want me to do about it?" "She's your sister, Anna. I'm just being polite." His response hit me hard like a slap in the face. I felt dismissed, and that only fueled my anger. I tried to explain that it wasn't just politeness, that Jessica was crossing a line, but he wasn't hearing me. "I'm not asking you to cut ties with her," I said, my voice shaking. "But you could at least set some boundaries and make it clear that you're not interested in her. I don't want you to stop being nice, but this is getting out of hand." He shook his head, brushing off my concerns. "You're overreacting," he insisted. "There's nothing going on. I'm just being nice and she's just excited about the wedding." I didn't know what to do anymore. The conversation seemed to be going in circles and nothing was being resolved. I was frustrated, angry, and hurt. But the worst part was that Daniel didn't seem to understand why I was upset. He wasn't acknowledging what seemed so obvious to me. He wasn't taking my feelings seriously, and I felt like I was fighting this battle alone. That night, we went to bed angry and frustrated, and the situation continued to weigh heavily on me. It felt like my world was slowly unraveling, but I couldn't seem to get anyone to understand why this was bothering me so much. The days that followed were tense. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange and unsettling behavior I had noticed between Jessica and Daniel. I felt as though I was being gaslit, with everyone brushing aside my concerns, making me feel like I was overreacting. Despite my boyfriend's constant assurances that everything was fine, the situation didn't feel fine to me at all. And as time went on, I became more and more convinced that I had to do something about it. I could no longer ignore what was happening. After my conversation with Daniel, I realized that I couldn't just let things slide anymore. I needed to talk to Jessica directly. I had spent so many sleepless nights going over everything in my head, questioning my instincts, wondering if I was imagining the whole thing. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't just some overblown jealousy. I had valid reasons to be concerned. So I decided to approach my sister. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to face this head-on. I called her one morning and suggested we meet up for coffee. Jessica agreed immediately, her voice as bubbly and cheerful as ever, which only made my stomach churn more. It felt wrong, like I was about to walk into an emotionally charged situation where everything was about to change forever. We met at a small cafe not far from her apartment. She arrived early as usual and was already sitting at a table when I walked in. She greeted me with a warm smile and immediately started chatting about her wedding plans. She was excited, talking about colors, flowers, and dresses, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was the tension building inside me, the weight of everything that had been happening in the weeks leading up to this conversation. I stirred my coffee nervously, trying to steady my hands, and took a deep breath before I spoke. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the seriousness of what I was about to say. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at me, and she stopped mid-sentence. "What's wrong?" she asked, clearly caught off guard by my sudden shift in tone. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I've noticed how you've been acting around Daniel," I began, trying to make it sound as non-confrontational as possible. "The flirting, the casual touches, the way you look at him when you think I'm not paying attention. It's making me really uncomfortable." Her expression changed almost immediately. For a moment, she looked confused, as if she didn't understand what I was talking about. Then the confusion shifted to something else, something I couldn't quite place. "What do you mean? I've just been friendly with him. You know how he is, he's like part of the family." But I could see right through her. I knew what I had seen, and I wasn't going to back down now. "It's not just friendliness, Jessica. You've been throwing yourself at him. I've seen it. You can't deny it. And it's hurtful to me." Her face turned red with anger, and I watched her try to control her emotions. "I'm not flirting with him," she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "You're just being paranoid, Anna. This is ridiculous." I felt a surge of frustration rising inside me, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "Don't dismiss my feelings," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't just paranoia. This is real, and you know it." Jessica let out a bitter laugh, her face twisted with disbelief. "You're seriously accusing me of something like this? The day before my wedding? You've got to be kidding me." She crossed her arms over her chest, and I could see her shutting down, refusing to even try to understand my perspective. I tried to explain again, my words coming out with more emotion than I had intended. "You've been constantly positioning yourself near him, trying to make him laugh at your jokes, touching him, leaning in close to him. It's not just being friendly. And it's not just me who sees it. It's wrong, Jessica." She looked at me like I had slapped her. The hurt in her eyes was unmistakable, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "I can't believe you're accusing me of this," she said through gritted teeth. "Maybe if you weren't so insecure about your relationship with him, you'd see that he's just being nice. But I'm not going to sit here and listen to you call me a liar." Her words stung more than I had anticipated. The emotional toll of this conversation was draining, but I had to keep going. "This is not about insecurity. This is about respect. You're crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, Jessica." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "If you can't trust me, then that's your problem, not mine." With that, she stormed out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there alone, feeling a mix of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. The conversation had gone exactly as I had feared. Jessica had denied everything, refused to take any responsibility for her actions, and shut me out in the process. I sat there for a few moments trying to collect my thoughts, but all I could feel was the deep ache in my chest. How had things gotten so bad? I had tried to talk to her, to explain my feelings, but all she had done was dismiss me, and now I wasn't sure how to move forward. When I got home that night, Daniel noticed something was wrong. I told him about the conversation with Jessica, about how she had reacted. His response? Maybe you overreacted. You should have been more patient with her. His words felt like a slap in the face. Once again, I was left questioning everything, my relationship, my sister, my feelings, and unsure of what to do next. It seemed like I had no support, and now my sister wasn't speaking to me at all. What had started as a simple feeling of discomfort had spiraled into a complete breakdown of communication and trust. The days following my confrontation with Jessica were nothing short of torturous. The tension between us had grown thicker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a huge mistake by confronting her so directly. She hadn't just brushed me off, she had completely shut me out, leaving me feeling isolated and unsure of where to turn next. Daniel tried to reassure me, but I could tell that he was struggling to understand why I was so upset. He kept telling me that I had probably misunderstood Jessica's actions and that I had overreacted. It was clear he didn't fully grasp the gravity of what was happening, and his attempts to downplay the situation only made me feel more alone. It wasn't just about insecurity, it was about respect, boundaries, and trust, and Daniel seemed unable to see that. Jessica, on the other hand, had become increasingly distant. Every attempt I made to reach out to her was met with silence. I called, I texted, and I even showed up at her apartment, but each time she closed the door on me, physically and emotionally. Her wedding was getting closer, and the emotional distance between us was growing wider by the day. I couldn't understand how things had gotten so bad so quickly. We had always been close, but now it felt like she had completely turned her back on me. As the days went on, my anxiety grew. I couldn't stop thinking about the wedding. I was supposed to be her bridesmaid, standing by her side as she said, "I do" to Mark. But how could I do that now, knowing what I knew? The idea of standing at the altar with Jessica, pretending like everything was fine, was almost too much to bear. And yet, I couldn't imagine missing her wedding. The guilt and confusion I felt were overwhelming. Was I really just being paranoid? Or had I truly caught something that no one else was willing to see? The emotional toll was immense. I couldn't focus on anything, and the little joy I had been able to find in my life had been replaced by stress and exhaustion. I found myself constantly questioning my choices, replaying the conversations with Daniel and Jessica over and over in my head, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. Then one evening, my worst fears came to life. I had just finished a long day at work and was heading over to my parents' house for dinner. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Jessica's car parked out front. I wasn't sure if she was there yet, but it was the only time I could make it, so I walked inside anyway. When I entered, I immediately noticed how unusually quiet the house was. My parents were sitting in the living room looking concerned. "Where's Jessica?" I asked, my voice tight with unease. My mom and dad exchanged a look, and then my mom spoke. "She's outside with Daniel. They've been talking for a while." I could feel a pit forming in my stomach as I walked through the house to the back door. I opened it slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible, but when I saw what was happening, I couldn't move. There they were, Jessica and Daniel, locked in a passionate embrace. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there, frozen. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was exactly what I had feared, but seeing it with my own eyes was a different kind of betrayal altogether. Jessica's legs were wrapped around Daniel's waist, and his hands were beneath her shirt. They kissed deeply, completely unaware that I was watching, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak all hit me at once, and I found myself unable to process it all. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, the air leaving my lungs. Finally, I managed to speak, my voice trembling with fury. "What the hell is this?" Both of them pulled apart immediately, their faces draining of color as they realized they had been caught. Jessica looked horrified, her eyes wide with guilt, while Daniel fumbled for words, his face flushed. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. But it was exactly what it looked like. My worst nightmare had come true. Everything I had suspected, everything I had felt in my gut, had been real. Tears began to spill down my cheeks as the full weight of the situation sank in. I couldn't believe it. My sister, my flesh and blood, had crossed the line in a way that I could never have imagined. And Daniel, the person I had trusted, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "How could you?" I choked out, my voice barely a whisper as I struggled to hold it together. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Jessica's face twisted with regret, but the words she spoke didn't help. "I'm so sorry, Anna," she said, her voice cracking. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened." But that didn't make it any easier. Nothing could explain away the damage that had been done. The trust that had been shattered, the bond that had been broken. I wanted to scream, to lash out at them both, but I just stood there, frozen in shock and disbelief. Daniel stepped forward, his face pale. "Please let me explain," he began, but I couldn't listen anymore. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I turned and walked away, my feet moving on their own as the tears kept falling. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. Not with them. Not in that place. As I reached my car, I could hear them calling after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to hear their apologies. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. All I wanted was to escape, to get away from the betrayal and the heartbreak. That night I didn't sleep. My mind raced with questions, with anger, with the terrible realization that everything had changed forever. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The wedding was only a few days away, and I was faced with the impossible decision of whether I should go or not. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I had to make a choice. The days leading up to Jessica's wedding were a blur of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion, and heartache. The world felt like it had turned upside down, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the pain that had lodged itself deep within me. I hadn't spoken to Jessica or Daniel since the night I caught them, and every time I thought about what I had witnessed, my stomach churned. The idea of going to the wedding felt unbearable, but there was also a part of me that didn't want to let Jessica win. I tried to push through, to distract myself with work and other tasks, but nothing seemed to work. The reality of what had happened weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could I go back to a family that had been so full of love and trust only to find it shattered? How could I stand by my sister's side after she had done something so unforgivable? And how could I look at Daniel, knowing that he had been complicit in this betrayal, and pretend that everything was fine? As the wedding day drew closer, I was torn. I knew that my absence would be noticed, and I feared the fallout that would come with it. But could I really be there, watching my sister walk down the aisle to marry the man who had shared a kiss with her just days before? How could I celebrate a union built on such deception? The stress of making a decision was too much. I found myself crying alone at night, wondering if I was doing the right thing, questioning whether my actions were justified or if I was simply overreacting. Deep down, I knew that I couldn't attend the wedding. I couldn't be part of a celebration that felt so wrong, so tainted by the secrets and lies that had been exposed. But the thought of breaking my family apart, of causing Jessica more pain on what should be the happiest day of her life, made me second-guess everything. On the morning of the wedding, I still hadn't made up my mind. I was sitting in my room, staring at the phone in my hand, thinking about all the missed calls and text messages from my parents, Jessica, and even Daniel. My heart ached every time I saw their names on the screen. They all wanted me to come, to forgive, to pretend that nothing had changed. But how could I? Just then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, I was greeted by my cousin Emma's voice. Her tone was filled with excitement, but it didn't take long for her to realize that something was wrong. "Anna, where are you? The wedding is about to start. Everyone's waiting for you," Emma said, her voice full of concern. "I can't go," I replied quietly, my voice shaky. "I can't be there." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Emma spoke again, more gently this time. "I understand why you're upset, but you have to think about this. Are you really going to let everything fall apart just because of what happened?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't that simple. Nothing was simple anymore. But I also didn't want to let my pain dictate every part of my life. "I don't think I can be there and pretend that everything's okay," I whispered. "I can't watch them get married knowing what I know." Emma sighed softly. "I get it. But maybe you should talk to Mark. Maybe hearing the truth from you will help. It's your last chance to clear the air before it's too late." Mark. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark, Jessica's fiancé, the one person I hadn't spoken to yet. The one person who had been in the dark about everything. He deserved to know the truth, and I knew I couldn't keep it from him any longer. After a long, quiet moment, I made the decision. I needed to speak to Mark, to tell him everything I had witnessed, everything I had suspected. No matter how painful it was, he had the right to know what had happened. This wasn't just about Jessica or Daniel, it was about doing the right thing. I called him immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, and there was a sense of relief in hearing his calm, steady voice. "Anna? What's going on? Are you okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mark, I need to talk to you. It's about Jessica and Daniel." Before I could say anything else, Mark interrupted, his voice filled with confusion. "What's going on? What about them?" I felt my emotions start to overwhelm me again, but I had to be strong. I couldn't let this moment slip away. I need to tell you the truth, Mark. I saw something. Something that you need to know before you marry Jessica. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Mark's breathing become heavier. What are you talking about? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to focus. The night before the wedding, I caught Jessica and Daniel together. They were kissing. In the garden. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to believe it. But it's true, Mark. They betrayed me, and they betrayed you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Mark's breath, but he didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. When he finally did, his voice was strained, filled with disbelief. Are you sure? Are you really sure about this? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Yes, Mark. I saw them with my own eyes. I didn't want it to be true, but it is. I thought you should know the truth. He sighed deeply and his voice softened. I need to process this, Anna. Thank you for telling me. But I need some time to think. I nodded even though he couldn't see me either. I understand. The line went silent again as he ended the call. I sat there, staring at the phone, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. I had done what I needed to do, but now everything was out of my hands. The wedding was still happening, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure. Whatever happened next, I knew I had made the right choice. I had spoken up even when it hurt. And for that, I could hold my head high. The next few days passed in a blur of tension, and despite the urgency of the situation, I felt no clarity. I had told Mark everything. The weight of that decision hung on me, but now it was in his hands. I kept thinking about what would happen next, the impending chaos, the confrontation, and the painful fallout that was bound to follow. But deep down, I had no idea how this would all unfold. The morning of Jessica's wedding arrived. I had spent the night at a friend's apartment to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. I still couldn't bring myself to face my parents, let alone go to the wedding. The thought of watching Jessica marry Daniel, knowing everything that had transpired, made my stomach turn. I had made the decision to stay away, yet the weight of that decision felt so heavy. As the hours ticked by, I received a stream of text messages and calls from my parents, Jessica, and even Daniel. I hadn't responded to any of them, but I knew they were trying to pull me back, to make me come to the wedding and pretend like nothing had happened. I could feel the pressure mounting. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message, my chest tightened. It was clear that they didn't understand the gravity of the situation. They just wanted everything to go back to how it was before. But for me, there was no going back. Around noon, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Emma. Her voice was filled with excitement, but there was something off about the way she spoke. I could sense she was nervous. Anna, are you coming to the wedding? You've got to come. Mark's here and he's really shaken up, she said, her words coming in a rush. He's asking about you. The whole family is really worried. I sighed, running my hand through my hair. I don't think I can do it, Emma. I don't want to be there. I can't pretend everything is fine. I can't sit there and watch them get married knowing what I know. Emma hesitated for a moment, and then she spoke more gently. I get it, Anna. I really do. But something's happening and I think you need to hear this. Mark is about to make an announcement and he wants you there. He's not sure how to handle things, but he's determined to do what's right. The words hit me hard. Mark was about to make an announcement? My heart began to race. I had no idea what this meant or how it would unfold, but I knew that if I stayed away now, I would never get the closure I needed. I needed to be there, not to show up for Jessica or anyone else, but to stand by the truth. I'll be there, I said finally, feeling a sense of dread settle in my chest. But I don't know how this is going to go. Emma quickly reassured me. Just come. We'll figure it out together. I took a deep breath and stood up, preparing myself for the most awkward and emotional wedding I could ever imagine. As I drove toward the venue, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the hurt, the secrecy. Now, I was walking into a situation that felt like a ticking time bomb. I knew that everything would change today one way or another. And as I approached the church, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The venue was decorated beautifully, with white flowers and soft lighting creating a romantic atmosphere. Guests were milling about, laughing and chatting, but I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just the usual wedding nerves, it was something else. As I walked in, I spotted Mark talking to a few family members. His face was drawn, his expression tense. I could tell he was struggling to keep his composure, but he managed a small, tight smile when he saw me. Anna, I'm glad you came, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the chatter. I needed to talk to you before everything starts. Before I could respond, he pulled me aside into a small alcove, away from the eyes of the guests. I've made my decision, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I can't marry her. I just can't. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? The wedding is starting. Everything is set. Mark nodded, his face pale. I know, but I can't go through with it. I can't marry someone who would do that to her own sister. The truth came out, Anna. I heard everything. I spoke to Jessica. She admitted to everything. And I can't be with someone like that. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Mark was standing up for what was right, even though it was causing him immense pain. He was doing the hard thing, not the easy thing. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was proud of him for doing what needed to be done. You're sure about this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark nodded. I'm sure. As we stood there, waiting for the ceremony to begin, I heard a commotion from the main room. My heart raced as I realized the moment had come. The guests had begun to gather, and the wedding was about to start. I could already hear the soft music playing, signaling the beginning of the procession. Mark and I exchanged one last glance before we walked back into the main area. But before we could even reach the front of the church, the doors flew open. Jessica appeared, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. Mark stepped forward, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. Everyone, I can't do this. I can't marry Jessica. I know the truth now, he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. She's betrayed her own sister, and I cannot marry someone who has done that. A gasp swept through the room. Guests began to murmur, unsure of what to make of this shocking turn of events. Jessica stood frozen at the altar, her face pale and filled with disbelief. It was as if the world had stopped, and everything she had worked for in that moment was crumbling. As I watched the scene unfold, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and finally, a deep sense of closure. Mark had done what he needed to do, but it was clear that everything had changed now. There was no going back. This wedding was over, and with it, the life we once knew. Jessica's sobs echoed in the church, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. The rest of us, on the other hand, would move forward. But we would never forget the price of betrayal. The chaos of the wedding day seemed like it would never end. After Mark's announcement, the guests slowly filed out of the church, leaving behind whispers and shock. Jessica's sobs were the loudest sound in the room as she crumbled, her carefully constructed image of the perfect bride falling apart before everyone's eyes. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but there was also something else: guilt. It was the guilt of someone who had been caught, someone who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences. Mark and I walked away from the altar together, our silent steps echoing through the emptying church. Neither of us spoke, but the weight of the moment hung heavily between us. I knew this wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was the only resolution we could have now. Jessica was left behind, and the relationship we once had was gone, irreparably shattered. I had no idea what would come next for her, but I knew I couldn't fix it. This was something she had to deal with on her own. As the days passed, I stayed away from my family. The tension was too high, too raw, and every phone call from my parents made my skin crawl. I didn't want to hear their excuses for Jessica's behavior, nor did I need to explain myself anymore. It wasn't my fault that the truth came out. It was her doing. And yet, the guilt crept in, as it always did when families turned against you. I still couldn't escape the feeling that I was to blame for causing the rift in the first place. But deep down, I knew it was the only way forward. I took some time for myself, using the solitude to process everything. I went on long walks, spent hours reflecting, and tried to wrap my mind around what had happened. I spent years trying to hold on to a sense of normalcy, trying to pretend that the things I saw and felt weren't there. But I couldn't do that anymore. No amount of pretending would ever bring things back to how they were. The person I was before the betrayal, before the heartbreak, didn't exist anymore. I had been changed by everything, but I knew that change was part of healing. One afternoon, I received a call from Mark. He hadn't contacted me in a few days, and I had been avoiding him as much as I had been avoiding everyone else. But this call was different. His voice was steady, calm, and he had something important to say. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, he began, and I want to make sure we're both okay. I know this situation has been difficult for you, and I need to tell you something. I sat down on the couch, my heart racing a little as I braced myself. What is it, Mark? I'm not perfect, he said softly, and I know I made mistakes. I should have done more, and I should have trusted you from the start. I think I was so focused on not causing conflict that I ignored what was happening right in front of me. But I can't change what I did. All I can do is move forward and try to do better. I let his words sink in, the sincerity in his voice soothing some of the anger that still lingered in my heart. I don't know where this leaves us, Mark. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you yet. I need time. I understand, he replied. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I can be the person you need me to be. His words gave me a strange sense of peace, but they also left me feeling conflicted. Mark had made his mistakes, but in some ways so had I. We had both been caught in this web of lies and betrayal. Yet, despite the pain and hurt, I knew that he was right. The only way forward was through understanding and time. If we were going to have a future together, it would take a lot of work and a lot of trust. As for Jessica, I hadn't spoken to her since the wedding. After the ceremony, she had tried to reach out to me, but I ignored her calls. I couldn't bring myself to speak to her, not yet. Maybe someday we could repair the damage, but that day wasn't today. For now, I had to focus on healing, on myself, and on reclaiming the parts of me that had been lost in the fallout. A week later, I met with my parents. They had been calling non-stop, wanting to talk, wanting to apologize, but I wasn't ready. I needed to control the narrative, to make it clear that I wasn't the one in the wrong. When we sat down at the kitchen table, my parents looked at me with a mixture of concern and regret. I didn't care about their regret anymore. I wasn't here for their pity. I'm done, I said calmly, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. I'm done pretending that everything is okay. I'm done making excuses for Jessica. She made her choices and I have to live with the consequences. But I won't keep apologizing for standing up for myself, for standing up for what I know is right. My mother's eyes welled up with tears, and my father's face softened in understanding. But I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I had to draw a line in the sand even if it meant losing everything. I spent the following weeks working on rebuilding my life. I went back to school, started seeing a therapist, and focused on creating a future that I could be proud of. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything threatened to pull me back into the darkness, but I kept moving forward. Step by step, I found myself again. The betrayal was still fresh in my mind, but I knew that I couldn't let it define me. I had been hurt, yes, but I was also stronger than I had ever been. And as I stood on the edge of this new chapter in my life, I knew that I would never allow myself to be taken for granted again. Jessica may have broken my heart, but she also gave me the clarity I needed to see who I truly was. Someone who would no longer be controlled by fear, someone who would fight for herself no matter the cost. It was time to rebuild, to grow, and to move on. And with that, I turned the page, ready to start a new chapter. One where I would never again allow anyone to betray me without consequences. One where I would finally be free. The story offers profound lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of self-respect. Life often presents situations where those closest to us, family and friends, betray our trust, leaving us feeling lost and hurt. However, this narrative shows us the power of standing firm in our convictions and confronting painful truths, even when it feels like the world is turning against us. The key lesson here is that we must never ignore our feelings or intuition, even when others try to dismiss our concerns. Respecting ourselves enough to set clear boundaries is essential for maintaining healthy relationships, whether with family, friends, or partners. As we grow older, it becomes even more important to prioritize our well-being and emotional health, rather than staying in situations that drain us or compromise our dignity. This story reminds us that, while forgiveness is a powerful tool, we must also recognize when to let go of toxic relationships and embrace healing. The journey may be difficult, but by staying true to ourselves and our values, we can emerge stronger and more capable of fostering genuine, loving connections. Always remember that it's never too late to set boundaries, to speak up for ourselves, and to rebuild a life based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found value in the story and the lessons shared, don't forget to comment one below to let us know. Your support means the world to us. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our future content. Also, make sure to like this video and share it with anyone you think would benefit from hearing this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the video, so please share your comments below. We love reading them. Thanks again for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next video.